The Rain House Diaries. Chapter 1. The Arrival. It had been raining for 3 days straight when Daniel arrived at the old rain house. The locals still called it that, the rain house, though no one quite remembered why. Maybe it was the way the roof always seemed to echo louder than any other home in the area. Or maybe it was because the rain never really stopped once you stepped inside. Daniel had inherited the place after his grandmother's passing. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, not since he left for the city. Chasing a job, a relationship, and eventually, a divorce. The rain house had stood quietly waiting at the edge of hollow pine forest. Untouched, undisturbed, and to most, forgotten. The cab dropped him off just before the gravel path disappeared into the woods. From there, he walked, suitcase in one hand, umbrella in the other, boots crunching against the soft, wet earth. The house emerged slowly from the mist, wood-paneled, moss-covered, with wide bay windows that seemed to peer out like tired eyes. Ivy crawled up the sides like veins, and the porch creaked before he even set foot on it, as if the house knew he had come home. He found the key in the same spot Grandma always left it, inside a hollow ceramic owl beside the door. The lock turned with a reluctant groan. The scent of old wood, rain-soaked pages, and something faintly sweet, like rosewater and thyme, greeted him inside. Chapter 2. The First Night. Daniel didn't do much that first evening. Just unpacked the basics, a change of clothes. His journal. A small photo of his mother when she was young, taken right on this very porch. She had the same faraway look he remembered from her stories. The look people wear when they've seen something they never fully understood. The electricity still worked. Surprisingly. Lights flickered but stayed on. The fireplace was cold, but there was dry wood stacked neatly beside it, as though someone had placed it there recently. He didn't light a fire. The rain outside felt oddly warm for April. There were no clocks ticking, no television humming, just the sound of rain sliding down the windows and the occasional whisper of wind against the siding. A kind of silence that didn't feel empty. More, paused. The bedroom upstairs hadn't changed. Floral wallpaper, slightly peeling, a dresser with one broken drawer. The bed creaked but held firm. On the nightstand, a small lamp, yellow glow. Warm, safe. Daniel lay down, closed his eyes, and listened. Thump, thump, thump. Not thunder, not his heart. Something else. A soft, steady rhythm. It came from downstairs. Maybe the house settling, he thought. He didn't go check. He just listened. And eventually, the rain took him. Chapter 3. The Journal. It was on the third day, still raining, that Daniel found the journal. He had gone looking for candles in the kitchen pantry, and instead, discovered a box beneath an old gingham tablecloth. The cardboard was damp at the corners, but the contents inside were surprisingly dry. There were photos, old ones, black and white, with curled edges. His grandmother as a young woman, standing on the porch with a man he didn't recognize, tall, solemn, eyes like shadows. And then there was the journal. The cover was navy blue. Soft leather worn thin from use. No name on it. Just a single word pressed into the corner in faded gold leaf. November. Daniel opened it. But the pages weren't blank. Nor were they written in any recognizable format. Each entry began the same way. It's raining again. But they only knock when it's quiet. The handwriting was elegant. Looping, like his grandmother's, but not quite. The Y's curled too tightly. The T's never crossed. And the entries, they weren't diary entries in the usual sense. More like observations, records, notes from someone waiting for something. Waiting for them. Whoever they were. Daniel read aloud one entry under his breath. April 14th, they stood just beyond the tree line. I didn't open the door. The wind brought the smell of lilacs. But there are no lilacs in the forest. He paused. Today was April 14th. And just then, thump, thump, thump. That sound again. This time, unmistakable. Knocking. Coming from the front door. Chapter 4, The Visitors. Daniel didn't move at first. The knocking was soft, almost polite, as if whoever stood on the other side didn't want to be there either, but had to knock all the same. Thump. 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 3 knocks. A pause. Then silence, broken only by the constant hush of rain sliding down the roof in streams. He stood slowly, the journal still open in his hand. Every instinct told him to leave the door alone. But curiosity, old and stubborn, crept in like fog through a cracked window. He made his way downstairs. The wood creaked underfoot, not groaning, just remembering. The front door looked taller now. Somehow. Narrower. Shadows pooled beneath the threshold like spilled ink. Daniel reached for the doorknob, then stopped. Something shifted in the air. A scent, faint, delicate. Lilacs. There were no lilac trees near the rain house. There never had been. His fingers froze just above the handle. He waited. 1 second. Then 2. 3. Nothing. No more knocking. He stepped back, locked the door, and turned away. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The wind whispered through the eaves, carrying with it half-formed words and the sound of wet leaves brushing against glass. He lay awake in the old bed, staring at the ceiling where a water stain had spread into the shape of an open eye. He tried not to look at it too long. Chapter 5. Letters that weren't there. The next morning, gray, still raining, Daniel found a letter on the kitchen table. He hadn't seen it the night before. He was sure it wasn't there. It hadn't fallen from a shelf or slid from a drawer. It was placed there. Centered. Waiting. No envelope. Just a folded piece of thick, ivory paper, heavy in the hand. The ink had bled slightly from moisture, but the handwriting was still clear. It read, Daniel, you came back. We wondered if you would. Some of us have been waiting. Some of us never left. If you hear them knocking, don't open the door. Not yet. There's more you need to remember first. Check the attic. L. He read the letter 3 times. Heartbeat steady but cold. Who was L? His grandmother's name had been Evelyn. No one in the family had a name starting with L. He checked the back of the letter. Nothing. But something about the handwriting felt familiar. Not from a person. From a time. Like déjà vu. In ink. He placed the letter beside the journal. Then looked toward the attic door at the end of the hallway. It had been sealed shut for as long as he could remember. But now, it stood open. Just a crack. Enough for the rainlight to slip through. Pale and flickering. Chapter 6, The Attic Door. The attic door had never opened before. As a child, Daniel had tried turning the knob once. Just once. But his grandmother had caught him and quietly, firmly, told him never to go up there. Some doors keep things in. Others keep things out. That was all she said. Now, the door stood ajar. The gap was no more than an inch wide. But it felt like an invitation or a warning. Daniel approached slowly. Every step down the hallway felt longer than the one before. The walls seemed narrower. Shadows clung to corners that shouldn't have existed. He pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, like something old stretching after a long, restless sleep. The stairs beyond were steep and narrow. He climbed them with care, each creak of wood beneath his feet sounding louder than the last. At the top, the attic opened up like a forgotten memory. Dust floated like ash in the dim gray light filtering through a single round window. Stacks of boxes lined the walls. A rocking chair sat in the corner, unmoving, and in the middle of the room, a mirror. Tall, framed in black iron, covered in a sheer white cloth that billowed slightly, as if breathing. Daniel stood before it. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and pulled the cloth away. The mirror showed the room behind him, almost. The boxes were there, the chair, the dust. But not him. He wasn't in the reflection. And behind him, in the mirror, the attic door was closed. Chapter 7: Names in the Rain. He left the attic without looking back. Didn't touch anything else. Didn't speak. Downstairs, the rain had grown heavier, no longer a whisper, but a soft roar, the kind of storm that presses against the windows like a memory trying to get in. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the journal and the letter in front of him. He opened the journal to a random page. Another entry. They call to me sometimes. Not with voices. With names. Names I thought I'd forgotten. Names I never learned. Another page. They don't need doors to enter. But they knock anyway. Out of respect. Or habit. Or hunger. He looked toward the front door. Still closed. Still locked. But something had changed. Along the inside of the window pane, names had begun to appear, faint, like they were written in condensation. Evelyn. Jonas. Elle. Daniel. His breath caught. His name was the last. Still forming. The letters trembling as if resisting. And then, they stopped. The house went still. No more names. Just one word, now written beneath them all. Remember. Chapter 8: The Man in the Window. That night, Daniel dreamed. Or maybe it was memory. Or something in between. He stood outside the rain house. Barefoot. The mud cool between his toes. It was raining. Softly. The kind of rain that made everything sound far away. The house stood dark. All the windows black except one. The attic. A man stood behind the glass. Barely visible. Face pale and blurred like a half-developed photograph. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He simply watched. Daniel tried to call out. But no sound came. He stepped closer. Then the man lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed behind Daniel. Daniel turned. There were children. 4 of them, standing beneath the trees. Their clothes were soaked through. Faces pale. Eyes dark. But not menacing, not quite. They looked at him not like strangers, but like someone waiting for him to remember their names. One of them opened her mouth to speak. But just before any sound emerged, a crack of thunder split the sky. Daniel woke. And the knocking had returned. Thump, thump, thump. But this time, it wasn't at the front door. It was coming from the attic. Chapter 9, The Name of El. He didn't move. Not at first. Just lay in bed, heart steady, eyes open, listening. 3 knocks. A pause. Silence. Then again. Thump, thump, thump. Daniel rose. Not quickly, but without hesitation. The journal sat open on the nightstand. Its ink smudged as if something had moved across the page in the night. He picked it up, flipping to the most recent entry. April 17th, he's close now. He saw the window, saw the children. He'll know me soon. I hope he forgives me. L. He paused. The L was written differently now. Sharper, familiar. And suddenly, the image clicked into place in his mind. The handwriting. The phrasing. The stories. L wasn't a stranger. L was Lyle. His older brother. Daniel hadn't thought of Lyle in years. He died when they were children, or so they told him. Fell from the attic stairs during a storm. Daniel had blocked it out, hadn't he? Or had someone helped him forget? The attic. The mirror. The door that never opened until now. Thump, thump, thump. This time, he climbed the stairs. The attic door was closed again, but this time, the handle turned easily beneath his hand. The attic was dark. The mirror stood waiting. But now, there was something else. A small wooden music box. Open. And playing a melody Daniel hadn't heard since he was 6 years old, a tune Lyle used to hum whenever the rain scared him. Chapter 10, The Memory Room. The music box played on. Its tune, soft, sweet, trembling, filled the attic with something heavier than sound. A presence, a history, a feeling Daniel had forgotten how to name. He stepped toward it, footsteps silent against the dusty floor. Inside the box, a small wooden figure of 2 boys beneath an umbrella. One taller than the other, both smiling. He stared at it, and the attic began to shift. Not physically, emotionally. The air thickened, as if soaked in something invisible. The walls began to whisper, not in words, but in sensations. The smell of wet leaves. The warmth of cocoa in winter. A bandaged knee. A missing toy. The soft thud of someone, falling down the stairs. Daniel staggered back. And then the mirror flickered. Not like a reflection. Like a screen. Inside it, he saw 2 boys, himself and Lyle, running through the hallway below. Barefoot, giggling, chased by the sound of rain. Lyle held the music box. Daniel, a paper sword. They were playing. Then, the fall. It wasn't an accident. Not quite. They had been fighting. Lyle had something Daniel wanted, a secret. A drawing. Something written in the back of the journal. Daniel had tried to snatch it from him. There was a shove. and Lyle had tumbled backward, his head hitting the wood with a sound Daniel had buried deep inside his bones. The mirror dimmed. Daniel dropped to his knees. He didn't cry. He simply breathed. Deep, slow, like someone remembering how to. Chapter 11, Rain That Falls Inside. Daniel stayed in the attic for hours. The rain outside had faded to a mist, but inside, it felt like it was still pouring. He opened the journal again. This time, he flipped to the very first page. A note he had never seen before was written there, in Lyle's handwriting. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means the house let you back in. It only does that when it knows you're ready. I'm not angry. I was never angry. I stayed because you needed time. We both did. But you need to do something now. There's one more door you haven't opened. It's not in the house. It's inside you. Daniel closed the journal. He didn't know what that meant, not fully, but he knew what he had to do next. He went back downstairs. The hallway was quiet, the air lighter. The names on the window had faded, all but one. Lyle. He opened the front door. And for the first time since he arrived, it wasn't raining. The world outside was still, calm, soaked in soft light. The forest looked less like a place of shadows and more like something waking up. Daniel stepped onto the porch. And there, sitting on the top step, was a boy. 10, maybe 11, dark hair, barefoot, a familiar crooked smile. Lyle. Not a ghost. Not a dream. Just him. They sat in silence for a long while. No words. Only the sound of birds, and wind, and the memory of rain. Chapter 12, The Last Knock. Lyle didn't speak. He didn't need to. Daniel sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, like they used to when they were small, knees muddy, hands full of scraped adventures. The porch was warm from the midday sun, still slick from the rain that had fallen for days. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full, like something healed had taken its final breath. After a while, Lyle looked over. "You remember now," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lyle smiled. Not sad, not angry, just peaceful. "It was never your fault, Danny. It was a moment. Just one." He paused. "But the rain kept falling until you came back." Daniel looked at the trees. The mist rising gently from the forest floor. The house behind them no longer seemed so heavy. "I thought I forgot you." Lyle shrugged. "You did. But only so you could find me again." Then, after a moment, "I have to go soon." Daniel's voice caught. "Where?" Lyle didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both stood. The forest shimmered at its edges, like the end of a dream trying to hold itself together. Lyle stepped off the porch. He turned back once, hands in his pockets, that lopsided grin still there. "Don't forget the door inside you, Danny." And with that, he walked into the trees. Not fading. Just leaving. Chapter 13, A House That Remembers. Daniel stayed at the rain house for 3 more days. It didn't rain again. He walked the woods. He read the journal, cover to cover. Some pages he swore hadn't been there before. Some seemed to disappear after reading. He left the music box in the attic, open. The mirror never moved again. It showed only his reflection now, tired, older, but finally whole. On the final morning, as he packed his bag, he found a second letter waiting on the kitchen table. It was unsigned. When you leave, the door will close again. But not forever. The house is only as haunted as the hearts that carry it. You're not alone. Not ever. Not truly. Just listen when the rain begins to fall. Daniel stood at the edge of the porch, suitcase in hand. He looked back once at the house, the trees, the attic window where no one watched anymore. And then he walked down the path. The gravel was dry, his footsteps quiet. Above him, clouds gathered softly in the sky. Not threatening, just a promise that someday the rain would return. And when it did, he would be ready to listen. End of story.
The Letter Keeper at the Old Cemetery. Chapter 1. The Hill of Fog. I don't quite remember the first time I walked up to the old cemetery on Fog Hill. I must have been 19, maybe 20, lost, aimless, and carrying a worn canvas bag, a notebook, and a vague whisper in my mind that sounded like my grandmother's voice. If you ever feel like you don't belong anywhere, she once told me, go up to Fog Hill. Something, or someone, will be waiting. I didn't ask what she meant. She passed away before I could. And by the time I arrived in that sleepy town in the Pacific Northwest, all I wanted was silence. The kind of silence that sinks into your bones and quiets the static in your head. The cemetery sat atop a hill just outside the edge of town. No signs pointed to it. No road led directly there. The locals simply called it the hill, always with a bit of reverence. Sometimes with unease. Every morning, without fail, it was blanketed in a gentle mist, as if the hill itself exhaled in its sleep. No one went up there anymore. Not since the 1970s. Maybe earlier. People whispered things, not about ghosts, but about loneliness, about memory, about how the place feels like it remembers you, even if you've never been there. I didn't find that frightening. I found it comforting. No one went up there anymore. Not since the 1970s. Maybe earlier. People whispered things, not about ghosts, but about loneliness, about memory, about how the place feels like it remembers you, even if you've never been there. I didn't find that frightening. I found it comforting. There was a tiny caretaker's shack at the base of the hill, wooden, mossy, and barely holding together. I moved in without asking anyone. Nobody seemed to mind. In fact, the woman at the local grocery store just smiled and said, "So you're the new watcher, huh?" I didn't know what she meant. Every morning, I'd brew a pot of tea, grab my notebook, and climb the stone steps into the fog. The cemetery was quiet, not eerie, but soft, like time moved slower there. The tombstones were worn, names half erased by moss and time. Some had flowers, most didn't. And then, one morning, it happened. At the iron gate, sitting neatly on the mossy stone, was an envelope, yellowed, a little damp, addressed in fading ink. To Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, third row on the left, beneath the red maple tree. I froze. Someone had written a letter, to a grave? I carried it up the hill, past rows of time-worn markers, until I found her, Eleanor Whitmore, 1913 to 1969. Her stone was cracked at the base, leaning slightly, half buried in damp leaves. I sat down on the bench nearby and opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten in a shaky, tender script. Mom, I dreamed of your kitchen last night, the yellow tiles, the smell of cinnamon rolls. You were standing by the stove, humming, and I swear I could feel the warmth of your hand on my back. I miss you. I'm sorry I yelled that day. I didn't mean it. I didn't know it'd be the last time. I wish you'd come back. Or at least, send a sign that you're still listening. I read the letter out loud, slowly, gently, letting the words fall into the still air like falling leaves. And when I was done, I folded it back, pressed it against the stone, and whispered. She heard you. I'm sure she did. I don't know why I cried. That was the beginning. After that, the letters kept coming, once a week, sometimes more. No one ever saw who left them. They'd just appear, always at the gate, always with a name, a location, a story. Some were short, only a sentence or two. I forgive you. Did you find peace? I still dream of the sound of your laugh. Others were pages long, confessions, regrets, love left unsaid. I never met the senders. I never had to. I just became the keeper. The one who made sure each letter reached its final resting place. At night, the cemetery didn't feel cold. In fact, sometimes it felt oddly warm, as if someone was sitting beside me on the old bench, not speaking, just listening. I started writing back. Not pretending to be the dead, just answering as someone who had read the letters, who understood the grief, the guilt, the tenderness. I'd leave my replies tucked beneath the stones. And somehow, they vanished. Every time. Maybe the wind took them. Or maybe someone, or something, was reading, too. I stopped looking for a job. Stopped worrying about who I was supposed to become. Because up there, in the quiet fog, among forgotten names and whispered stories, I had found a calling. I was the keeper of letters. At a cemetery where the dead listened. And the living still had something to say. Chapter 2. The First Letter. There's something sacred about opening someone else's letter, something I wasn't sure I had the right to do. And yet, a week after the first envelope appeared, I found myself waiting by the cemetery gate at dawn. The fog was heavier that morning. The sun hadn't risen, and the air was thick with dew. Silence wrapped around the hill like a soft shawl. Then I saw it. A second envelope, neatly placed on the stone. Same aged paper, same faded handwriting. To Mr. George Whitmore, beneath the willow. Row 4. Whitmore. The same last name as the first. I hadn't noticed his grave before. Most of the tombstones on that row leaned awkwardly, half swallowed by ivy and roots. But the willow was easy to find, a huge tree. Old and heavy, its branches cascading like green curtains. And beneath it, a small, simple marker. George Whitmore 1910 to 1968. Loving husband, loyal friend. I sat down in front of the stone, the letter trembling in my hands. Inside, the paper was thinner this time, folded twice. The handwriting was less neat, as if written quickly, emotionally, almost as though the writer couldn't hold the words in anymore. Dad. I didn't know you were the first to go. Mom never said. She talked about you like you were still out there somewhere. I think maybe that helped her keep going. I found the picture of you two dancing. The one where Mom's wearing that ridiculous hat and you're in that corduroy jacket she always teased you about. You looked happy. Not just smiling, happy. The kind of happy that wraps around you like a blanket. I wish I'd known you longer. I think I'm getting closer to forgiving you. For leaving, for dying, for not being there when I needed you most. It's weird, writing to the dead, but you always told me to write things down when I couldn't say them out loud. So here I am, writing to a stone. But somehow, it doesn't feel like no one's listening. I sat there long after the letter ended, listening to the wind play through the willow's branches. The sound reminded me of water, soft, steady, comforting. For a moment, I felt as if the tree itself had exhaled. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter of my own. Dear George, your child is trying. They're reaching through the years, through grief, through guilt. If you can still hear anything from wherever you are, know that they're not angry. Not anymore. Just lost. Just human. I folded the letter and returned to the grave, placed it under a smooth rock at the base of the headstone. The next morning, it was gone. After that, the letters kept coming, some from the same hand, others from people I began to recognize by their writing style, the way they folded their paper, the kind of ink they used. And they weren't all addressed to the Whitmores. There was a note to someone named Sam, just 2 words scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper. "I'm sorry." Another, to a woman named Margaret, was written entirely in French. I didn't speak French, but I could tell from the way the words were underlined, the ink smudged, that it had been written with trembling fingers and tear-filled eyes. I began to catalog them. Not the names, not the dates, but the feelings. Loss, regret, love, guilt, hope. The cemetery became something more than a resting place. It became a kind of halfway point, a meeting ground between the living and the dead, where the unsaid could finally be said. And I was just the listener. The one who carried each letter to its proper place. Then, one night, something changed. I was locking the gate after dusk, something I'd started doing out of habit, not necessity, when I noticed a figure at the top of the hill. Tall, still, facing one of the graves. I called out. No answer. When I climbed up, there was no one there. Only a new letter, already resting on the grave. And this time, it was addressed to me. Chapter 3. The Grave of Memory. It was past 7 when I reached the top of the hill. The fog was thinner than usual that night, and the moon hung low like a watchful eye. I'd locked the gate, I was sure of it. I'd latched the old iron hook myself, heard it clink, and yet, there had been someone standing by the stone marked Emerson, a family plot. Mostly forgotten, rarely visited. But by the time I climbed up, the figure had vanished. And in its place, resting neatly on a flat stone, was an envelope. It had no return address, no postage, but it was addressed to me, to the letter keeper. My name wasn't on it. No one in town called me that, at least not to my face. It was a quiet title, passed between whispers at the diner, maybe in half-curious glances at the market. He's the one who lives on the hill, keeps the letters for the dead. But this letter felt different. I opened it slowly, my fingers slightly trembling. You don't know me. But I know you. I know you've been reading them. Every letter. I know you think you're just a caretaker, just a witness. But you're not. You've been carrying their stories, their grief. And somewhere along the way, you stopped telling your own. There's a stone by the east wall, cracked in 2, no name. It remembers you. You should visit. I read it 3 times. The last line sent a cold thread down my spine. It remembers you. Who had written this? And why did it feel so intimate? I followed the note's directions the next morning. East wall, cracked stone. I'd walked past that spot 100 times before. The stone was so weathered, so broken, it was easy to ignore, a fragment of someone long forgotten. But now, I saw it differently. The crack down the center looked like a wound. The moss clung like stubborn memories. And as I knelt beside it, brushing away a film of wet leaves, I saw something beneath the grime. A carving, barely legible. 3 letters. EMR. I froze. My grandmother's initials. Suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting by her fireplace, listening to her talk about the old hill where letters find their way even after death. I thought it was just one of her bedtime stories. I hadn't known she was buried here. I sat in silence for a long time. No words, no tea, no letters in hand. Just me, and a broken stone, and 1,000 memories I hadn't realized I was still holding. That night, I didn't wait for another letter. Instead, I wrote one myself. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. I didn't know you were here. I thought I was helping others carry their grief. But I think I was hiding my own. You once told me that when we feel lost, it's not because we have no path. It's because the path is waiting for us to look up. I'm looking now. Thank you for everything. I placed the letter at her grave. No rock, no ribbon. Just paper, and the wind. By morning, it was gone. After that day, something changed. The fog still came, the letters still arrived, but I read them differently now, not as a stranger listening to ghosts, but as someone who understood what it meant to be haunted by memory. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wind through the trees felt like someone whispering back. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Nameless One. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. I almost missed it. Unlike the others, clean envelopes, careful handwriting, this one was folded messily. No envelope, just a sheet of yellowed notebook paper. Its edges curled like it had been kept too long in someone's pocket, or under their pillow. There was no name. No address. Not even the usual "to" at the top. Only this. I don't know who you are anymore. That was the first line. I sat down on the bench near the gate, the paper shaking slightly in my hand, the early morning wind colder than usual. I read on. You used to hum when you were afraid. Not loud, just under your breath, that low tune like a half-remembered lullaby. You never looked anyone in the eye for long. Always glanced down, like words weighed too much. I wonder, do you still hum? Do you still sit on rooftops and count stars, even though you never believed in wishes? There's a silence here that grows teeth. It bites when I sleep. I think I left too much of myself behind. Maybe on purpose, maybe not. I keep dreaming of a field of white sheets hanging in the wind. Each one has a name. Except one. One is blank. I think it's mine. I don't know how long I sat there after reading. The fog rolled in slowly that morning, heavier than usual. It pooled around the stones like breath held too long. This letter wasn't like the others. It wasn't written to someone. It felt like it was written from something, or someone who no longer remembered their name, only their grief. I searched the entire cemetery that day. Every stone. Every corner. I was looking for something, some clue, some sense of who this letter might belong to. But no marker stood out. No one buried here matched the tone, the voice, the haunting sorrow. That night, I lit a single candle and placed the letter beneath the old elm tree in the middle of the cemetery. That tree was ancient, older than any headstone. Its roots ran deep. Its bark was cracked like the spine of an old book. The next morning, the letter was gone. But in its place was another. Same paper, same messy folds. This time, the writing was sharper, angrier. You read it. I felt you. Why do you keep pretending you're not one of us? The stones speak when you're not listening. They call you by the name you buried. The one you won't write. The one that doesn't fit on a headstone. I dropped the letter. Something in me recoiled, not out of fear, but recognition. Like when you hear a voice in a dream and know you've heard it before, even if you can't place the face. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the elm with a thermos of tea and a blanket over my shoulders. I waited. And as the wind danced through the leaves, I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Only silence. And yet, for the first time since I arrived on this hill, I felt like someone, or something, was waiting for me to write back. So I did. To the one with no name. I don't know who you are, or what you were, but I think I've carried pieces of you with me. In my fears, In the way I glance away. In the way I hum when I'm alone. Maybe that's why I came here. Not to deliver letters, but to remember something I've forgotten. If you're still listening, I'm ready. I folded the letter and left it at the foot of the elm, weighed down by a small stone. By morning, it was gone. But carved into the bark of the tree, faint but unmistakable, were 3 letters. EMR. My grandmother's initials. Again. End of chapter 4. Chapter 6. The last letter. The photograph haunted me. Not because it was a ghost, but because it wasn't. Because it was real. Because it was me. Because I had forgotten. I spent the next 3 days in silence. No letters arrived. No wind stirred the trees. Even the fog felt thinner, like it too was holding its breath. I returned to the hollow where I'd found the rusted box. I sat there for hours, waiting for something, a whisper, a voice, a name. But all I heard was the wind brushing gently against the cracked stones. I was maybe 4 or 5 when it happened. We were visiting Fog Hill. My grandmother loved this place, even before she asked to be buried here. She told me stories of letter keepers and whispering trees. Of people who still spoke from the earth. Of children who disappeared and never really left. I had followed a girl that day, or maybe it was a game I played in my head. She ran through the fog. I chased her. I don't remember her face. Only the sound when she slipped. The thud, the silence. Then the fog swallowed everything. And I never told anyone. Not even my grandmother. Not until now. That night, I wrote one final letter. Not for the dead. Not for the cemetery. But for myself. To the one I forgot. I see you now. I know what happened. You weren't just lost in the fog. You were left there. Not out of cruelty. Not out of fear. But out of the unbearable weight of guilt a child couldn't carry. I was just a boy. But I should have remembered you. I should have spoken. I buried you in silence. I'm sorry. I placed the letter at the foot of the old elm tree, the same one that bore my grandmother's initials. This time, I didn't wait for it to disappear. I walked down the hill. Back to the shack. Back to the life I had chosen. The fog rolled in as I left, soft, forgiving, and quiet. The next morning, the letter was gone. But something else was waiting. By the gate, tucked beneath a smooth river stone, was a final envelope. Simple. Clean. Unmarked. Inside, a single slip of paper. 10 words. You remembered. That was all I ever needed. I never saw another letter again. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I still hear the echo of paper fluttering beneath tree roots. I still feel the weight of words that never reached the living, but found their place anyway. I still keep the gate unlocked. Just in case. Not for the dead, but for the ones still searching for what they've forgotten. The end. Grandma's Radio. A gentle ghost story about music, memory, and one last song. The sound of rain. The first time the old radio played again, it was during a thunderstorm. It had been silent for years, ever since Grandma passed. It sat on the windowsill in the kitchen, right where she always left it, a dusty little thing with a cracked dial and the faint scent of lavender clinging to its cloth speaker cover. No one touched it after she was gone. Not out of grief, just respect, like it belonged to a time that shouldn't be disturbed. So when I walked into the kitchen that rainy afternoon and heard Ella Fitzgerald's voice floating through the air, soft, scratchy, unmistakably live, I stopped cold. The radio was on, tuned to no station I recognized. And yet, somehow, it was playing Grandma's favorite song. Musical notes, at last. My love has come along. Musical notes. A song she never forgot. Growing up, I spent every summer at Grandma's house. She'd bake apple pies that tasted like warm hugs. Let me play with her collection of porcelain cats. And every evening, just before sunset, she'd turn on that old radio. Jazz. Always jazz. She said the music made her bones feel young again. Music, she told me once, is how the soul remembers what time forgets. I didn't understand then, I do now. After she passed, I moved into her home, more out of necessity than choice. My life had cracked apart at the seams. A job I hated. A relationship that ended badly. Debts that never stopped breathing down my neck. The house was the one place that still felt soft. Familiar. Like a memory you could live inside. So when the radio played that first night, I thought maybe I imagined it. Until it happened again. And again. Always during storms. Always her favorite songs. 3. A whisper between notes. One night, as lightning stitched the sky, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and waited. Right on cue, a soft click. Then the low hum of static. Then a voice, as clear as memory. You didn't forget me. It wasn't the radio host. There was no host, no commercials, just music, drifting like perfume in the rain. But I knew that voice. It was hers. I didn't respond, just sat there, frozen, warm tears rising. The next song played. Musical notes, what a wonderful world. Musical notes. And I swore I could feel her hand on my shoulder, gentle. Like when she used to wake me up for school. IV, the last song. Weeks passed, the storms kept coming. I started leaving a chair out across from me. Pouring 2 cups of tea. Talking to the air. Sometimes, when I was brave enough, I'd whisper. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you passed. Or, I miss your pie. And always, the radio would hum in response, never words. Just melody, always the right song. Until one night, it didn't. No storm, no static. Just silence. And a note. Folded neatly, resting on the radio's dial. Thank you for remembering. You can stop waiting now. I'm home. Verses now, when it rains. The radio never played again. But I still sit in the kitchen on rainy nights, make 2 cups of tea, and play Ella Fitzgerald on my phone. Not because I'm waiting, but because I remember. Because music, like love, lingers long after the room is empty. Because somewhere, in a place I can't reach but sometimes feel, Grandma is still dancing, still smiling, still listening. The end. The Porch Swing. A love story told in creaks, wind, and quiet evenings. The swing still moves. When I moved back to my parents' old farmhouse after my wife passed, I didn't expect the porch swing to still be there. It had weathered storms, ice, and 30 years of creaking summers. But there it was, slightly tilted, a little rusted, the paint on its chains chipped away like old nail polish. I almost didn't sit on it. Too many memories. Too much silence. But one evening in early autumn, the kind where the air smells like apples and wood smoke, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, stepped outside, and sat. The wood felt warm. The chain moaned the way it always had. I stared out at the overgrown yard, the fence half fallen, the trees whispering. And then, the swing beside me moved. The ghost in the stillness. It didn't move like the wind had caught it. It moved like someone had sat down. Slowly, gently, as if being polite. And then, the weight settled. I turned my head, not quickly. Not afraid. I knew that presence. I didn't see her, not exactly. But I smelled the lavender lotion she always wore. Heard the soft tisk-tisk she used to make when the coffee was too bitter. Felt the warmth of a body that wasn't there. I whispered her name. And the swing swayed in response. 3 things left unsaid. We used to talk on that swing for hours. Sometimes nothing important, sometimes everything. She liked to count stars. I liked to listen to her count. After the cancer diagnosis, she asked if we could sit outside more. Said the fresh air helped her sleep. Said the swing reminded her of when we first met, 2 broke kids on a porch in Tennessee. Making plans we were too young to believe. When she died, I thought those nights were over. But the swing kept moving. Even when the air was still. Even when I didn't sit down. It creaked like it used to. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Her rhythm. IV. A conversation without words. I started talking again. At first, just small things. How the coffee tasted. How the apples were coming in too early. How I finally fixed the leak under the sink she always reminded me about. And sometimes, I'd hear things. Not voices, but creaks that came at the right moment. A sigh of wind when I asked a question. A warmth on my shoulder that stayed longer than any breeze. One night, I brought out the old photo album. Held up a picture of us in New Orleans. Remember this? You hated that dress. The swing shivered like laughter. And I smiled for the first time in months. V. The empty swing. On the first anniversary of her passing, I made 2 cups of tea. Set one on the porch railing. Waited. But that night, the swing didn't move. It stayed perfectly still. No creaks, no lavender, no warmth. Just stars. Just wind. Just me. And I understood. V. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. The next morning, I sanded the swing, repainted the chains, oiled the hinges. Then I sat alone, coffee in hand, and watched the sunrise, the way she always liked it, no words. Just light and quiet. I didn't need her ghost anymore. But I'd always leave space beside me. Just in case. Not for her. But for the memory of love that doesn't fade, only settles into silence. And swings when no one is looking. The end.
Voice 1, Introduction. Far, far away, beyond forests and misty mountain passes, lies a small valley seemingly forgotten by time. They call it Misty Village, because in the early mornings and quiet nights, a gentle fog wraps around every roof, every stone path, and every sleeping flower. Life there moves slowly. People aren't in a rush. Children laugh under old trees, and the elderly sip tea on wooden porches, retelling old tales as if the world has all the time it needs. But Misty Village holds a gentle secret. A soft-spoken ghost, kind as morning dew, the Night Watcher. No one fears him. No screams, no chills. Each night he drifts quietly through the village, like a lullaby whispered by the wind. Remembering old Mr. Lamb? Long ago, he was just Mr. Lamb, an old woodworker who lived alone in a tiny cabin beneath the oldest pine tree. He had no children, but the villagers loved him as their own. Every evening for over 70 years, he wandered the paths of the village, gently closing windows, picking up fallen twigs, and leaving small candies by doors for children to find in the morning. Voice 4. Then one cold winter's night, he passed away. No sigh, no farewell, just a peaceful ending. But soon after, someone continued his rounds. Windows were closed, candy reappeared. The scent of warm wood lingered in the air, as if Mr. Lamb had never left at all. One day, a traveling writer stayed overnight in Mr. Lamb's old cabin. The next morning, he said, I've never slept so peacefully. In my dream, someone hummed a tune with no words. Was it possible that a ghost had watched over me? So tonight, if your blanket feels a bit cozier, if the wind sounds like soft footsteps outside your window, don't be afraid. It's only the night watcher of Misty Village, passing by once more, to guard your dreams and keep your sleep gentle and kind.